Welcome back. If we continue with the cash flow statement question that we were doing, as I told you, when it comes to the key workings like increase in inventory, increase in payable, or increase or decrease in receivable, the format you can use is to, and actually to use a T account. A lot of students don't understand the benefit of using T account when you do all adjustment for cash flow statement. Now if I take the T account for inventory, you can start with the brought forward figure, and then you need to make the adjustment for if ever there is an acquired subsidy during the year, the closing figure is more than the opening figure because of that. So whatever the inventory at the date of acquisition should be adjusted. Otherwise you'll end up with the wrong increase in inventory. And I also must stress here and say that if the examiner gives a disposal of a subsidiary, then you do the opposite of that, which is instead of debiting it, you credit it, or basically show on the credit side if it is a disposal. Then another complication the examiner can introduce is the exchange gain. Now if it is exchange gain on the income statement, it should be on the credit side, so therefore on the inventory account it should be on the debit side. If I repeat the same process for payable brought forward will be on the credit side, and then you have the carried down value, and then again you will have this concept of acquired subsidiary, but acquired subsidiary figure should be on the credit side this time, because there's an increase as a result of the newly acquired subsidiary. Whatever the payable at the date of acquisition should be adjusted. Same way, if there is an exchange loss, for example, in the income statement exchange loss is on the debit side, therefore here in the payable account it should be on the credit side. Once you adjust these two figures, you will arrive at the increase or decrease in payable. And as I told you earlier, if the examiner gives you a disposal question, then you have it is on the other side, which is for payable it should be on the debit side, because disposal should reduce the payable. Then same way for receivable, see whether you can work out the format. Format will be the brought forward receivable on the debit side, the carried down receivable on the credit side, and then the acquired subsidiary, the examiner gives a subsidiary acquired during the year, should be debited. If there is an exchange gain, that should be debited, whereas if it's an exchange loss, should be credited. Why an exchange loss should be credited? In the income statement, exchange loss is on the debit side, so in the receivable account it should be on the credit side. As I told you again earlier, you need to remember if there is a disposal, whatever the receivable at the date of disposal should be deducted, which is crediting the receivable account. This same process is repeated for every other important adjustment. You take non-current asset. Now how non-current asset can change. The brought forward non-current asset can vary as a result of number of reasons. Number one is that there can be a revaluation during the year. Number two is that the closing balance of the non-current asset can be more as a result of whatever the asset that is there at the date of acquisition. So if there is acquired subsidiary, that should be added. Number three is that there can be new acquisition under finance lease. Now that you are not paying cash, so you need to adjust it. Otherwise, whatever the figure that you arrive for, cash addition will be wrong. So if I repeat again, when you have the net book value of the non-current asset, adjustments are, you need to adjust for the revaluation reserve, whatever the acquired subsidiaries figure should be adjusted, plus whatever the new obligation under finance lease should be adjusted. Now, what are the credit entries in the non-current asset, or what are the values that will bring it down, where the carried forward down amount is lesser? One is depreciation. Any disposal you need to credit, and of course you debit the disposal account. and you work out the profit or loss on disposal. As you know, profit or loss on disposal is an item that you add back, or if it is a profit you deduct, if it's a loss you add back. Then if I take NCI again, what do? NCI is a credit balance. So NCI account format, if we try to imagine the NCI account format, you will have the brought forward figure on the credit side, you have the carried down figures on the debit side. Any NCI of the acquired subsidiary should be added to the credit side, and then whatever the NCI that income share of the income of that belongs to NCI should be credited, and this will result in the balancing figure, which is the dividend paid to the NCI. Same way, if there is an investment in associate company, let me stress and tell you this: all adjustment for associate company is done through one single account. So let's see what are the possible adjustments. You'll have the brought forward figure on the debit side of an investment in associate company. You'll have the carried down figure on the credit side. And in what way the figure can change? One is your share of profit for the year, so it can change by that amount, so you debit that. And also you should remember that when it comes to the associate company, you need to also consider the dividend received. How do you work out the dividend received? You take the balancing figure to be the dividend received. But let me stress and say that, let's say that there is a new acquisition of an associate company during the year, then by that amount the carried down value will increase. So that also should be adjusted before you arrive at the dividend receipt figure. Same way, if there is a disposal of an associate company, you need to credit that amount in the investment in associate company, because investment in associate company value will come down because of that disposal. And a lot of students don't get this right, that the profit or loss on disposal of associate company also should be adjusted through the same account. The easiest way to look at that is, if it's a profit in the income statement, it's on the credit side, therefore in the investment in associate company should be on the debit side. If it's a loss in the income statement, it's on the debit side, in the investment in associate company it should be on the credit side. So these are the key adjustments. Since it is an important area, and which I think is going to come, if I summarize it, key adjustments is that you need to remember to make adjustment for when you reconcile the profit before tax to the profit, cash profit. You need to add back depreciation. You need to add back amortization of intangible assets. You also need to add back any impairment loss of goodwill. You need to also remember, if the examiner wants to test, he can test pension fund, whatever the income statement figure charge should be added back, and then at the bottom you must deduct the whatever the amount you paid to the scheme. And then in addition to that, you also should remember the other adjustment that are possible is if profit before tax is arrived after deducting finance costs, obviously you need to add that back if it is an expense. Any profit or loss on selling assets should be adjusted. If it's profit, it's deducted. If it is a loss, it should be added back. And then you need to make the adjustment for increase or decrease in working capital item. How do we do that? As I told you, for inventory, if I repeat one more time, if I only focus on inventory, you need to start with the brought forward figure on the debit side, and then the closing balance sheet figure in the credit side. And inventory can change as a result of a newly acquired subsidiary. So whatever the inventory at the date of acquisition should be added. And it also can change as a result of exchange gain or loss on translation of a foreign subsidiary. And if that comes if it's only if there is a foreign subsidiary, then what you do is that exchange gain or loss, if it is a loss in the income statement, is on the debit side, and the inventory account should be on the credit side. If it's a profit or gain on exchange gain, then it's on the income statement, is on the credit side. Here it should be on the debit side. This process is repeated for every other adjustment, which means that you should remember acquired subsidiary figure is debited or increase whatever the brought forward value by the acquired subsidiary figure. If it is a disposal, then you reduce the value. Now, for example, let's say that you have a non-current asset, right? Now, if you have an acquired subsidiary during the year, you will debit that. If there is a disposal of a subsidiary, whatever the non-current at the date of disposal should be deducted. So, all the best with a very probable question, this time mainly for section P. If cash flow doesn't come, don't forget, as I told you earlier, it's maybe the sub-subsidiary under the new rule for fair value, and of course, if not, disposal with a statement of financial position. If any of this question doesn't come appear in section P, then it will appear in section A. You can be sure about it. Thank you very much. So we'll take a break and we'll come to our final session after the break.